Alright, everyone. We are back once again with the adventures of the monk and the monarch. Me, the monarch, and my co host, Mildra the monk.
Hello.
Now, if you've seen a few of these, we've kind of teased talking about Yuasa for some time now. He's come up somewhat regularly on these shows. I just needed a little bit of time to finally catch up on his work because I have somehow missed just about everything this guy has directed up until now.
Well, at your height, I'm sure a lot of things go over your head.
Hey, if this title card's anything to go by, for purposes of this show, I am technically slightly taller than you.
Uh,
We're going to ignore the reality. I'm, about a foot beneath you almost?
as far as I know, you could be standing on a rock in that image.
We'll go with that. But yeah.
But
Oh, go on.
yeah, and we've been no strangers to doing deep dives on certain directors. Some of it is due to us growing up in the auteur effect of directors from the 1970s, and some of it is just that certain directors have have a very specific style that even if you don't read the credits, you can tell that they were working on something.
And from what I've been picking up with Yuasa, that is clearly the case.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that everything he does turns to gold. No, but nobody bats 1,000. But you are not gonna confuse him with anybody else.
Yeah, because I haven't watched this one, but I did look up just even images of Slime Adventures Yay the Sea, one of his earliest things he's directed. I can clearly see a line going from that to Kaiba, which we'll get into that specifically in a bit more detail, but it's
Yeah,
very distinct.
the thing when it comes to Yuasa is that for the longest time, whenever I would see his name crop up in my seasonal upcoming list, I would be both looking forward to it and also dreading it. Yuasa has a very amorphous attitude with using 2.5D, where he will use 2D animation but also mix it with 3D imagery. Not full on CG, but full on, and his storytelling style definitely borders on the surrealist. So whenever animation studio decides to throw money at him, I'm worried that I'm gonna see something that's gonna require a sand check, because the best way to describe his stuff is things get weird.
Where I kind well, I thought where I was introduced was my game. I did realize when I went back to see Kick Heart, I have actually watched Yuasa before, which some of you may remember I've said I've never come across him. My bad, I was wrong there. But yeah,
Yeah.
he gets weird.
Now, Yuasa had first broken in through Chibi Maruko-chan and Crayon Shin-chan. Um, he was an animator for those particular series, and of course Shin-chan is a is I'd say an institution by this point.
I will point
Maruko-chan
out
is
he's done
far off.
some work before that, but nothing that major. Like he was a key animator on 2 episodes of something called Oishinbo. But yeah, Shin-chan does seem to be the moment he really kind of started to make a name for himself.
Yeah, the biggest case of him making a name for himself and the breakout was his directorial debut, which was Mind Game, back in 2004.
Now, there's going to be people that are like, well, a good number of people that are kind of going to be like, what's that? There's a reason a lot of people don't know some of this earlier work, and that's a lot of this early work never made it stateside.
For the longest
Except
time,
for the
yeah.
yeah, except for
Um,
the what was it, the Adult Swim showing of Mind Game that one time.
Mind Game had already been around for a
Yeah.
while. It's just that a lot of the people who are like, I've never heard of that," tend to be the same people who only know like six or so shows and don't branch out. And of course but of course there's also the fact that he was working with Studio 4C with that one, and I've jokingly called Studio 4C the video game studio, because that seems to be the majority of what they've been doing for several years, is just doing anime cutscenes for video games.
I mean, hey, if they've got the touch for it, might as well keep going to them.
I suppose. It was funny as all hell to see a bunch of casuals, normies, whatever you want to call them, react to Mind Game because one of the key things, and this is something that's a recurring thing with his work, Yuasa very much is trying to push and see how much he can get away with and still call it animation.
Like, I would still distinctly call anything of his I've seen animation, but there's nothing else that comes across looking like what this guy does when he just goes nuts, which seems to be most times he directs something.
Pretty pretty much.
Like, with Mind Game, it took me a minute to kind of get into that movie. At first, like, the animation wasn't really clicking with me because everything felt oddly stiff and not quite natural up until the movie just goes balls out crazy. Then everything just seems to flow so nicely. I think that was probably by design, though.
Yeah, I could certainly see it. I mean, yes, the whole movie is themed around seizing the day, but the journey to get there is definitely strange, and it's one of those cases where the line is blurred about what's actually happening and what isn't. It seems like a normal story that's taking place in modern Tokyo, and then all of a sudden we start having hallucinations, and then the fucking whale.
I don't know if they're hallucinations, though, is the thing. Like, did he go to heaven and meet God and run back to reality? I don't know. But I'm alright with
But
not having a clear answer there.
yeah, it's one of those cases where the answer isn't going to be a deal breaker to not have. You just have to be prepared for the fact that drugs are involved.
I will
Well,
say,
we don't know if he's on
oh
any,
no,
but
I will say I'll go into a bit more later once we get down to Kaiba. But I looked through the AMA they did on Reddit for Kickheart. Yuasa himself assured everyone no drugs were involved in the making of any of his works, and it wasn't until about 2013 he even started drinking. I don't know how much we can trust his word on this one, but this was the sober plan,
yeah.
effectively.
Do I need to do I need all I keep thinking of at this moment is the whole Ken Patera didn't throw the boulder kind of thing. I have a hard time believing. And of course, after after Mind Game, we had Kemino Zume, which was weird, but at the very least, Madhouse got to finish something.
I will say I don't think the story was too weird, at least not following something like Mind Game. Like, something to note, the actual stories he's telling aren't that strange on paper.
No, it's how he tells them.
Yeah. That said, I felt Kemozume was a little too ordinary in a lot of ways for how weird his presentation was. But that's it. I think this is like his first time directing a series.
Yeah, since Mind Game was a movie,
Yeah.
and before that he was doing animation work for episodes off and on with various projects.
Yeah, reception for this one seems a little mixed, but it
I could certainly see why.
like I did kind of come down on not really enjoying that one much. At the same time, though, it's I'm not going to say it's not interesting to see.
And maybe I'll revisit it for Parliament because it is 13 episodes.
Yeah.
Whenever you're dealing with anime in the early to mid 2000s, there's one thing that you have to keep in mind. This was a period of transition where you had a lot of people going from traditional drawn animation to more digital tools, especially DigiPaint. So there were some awkward transitions around this time. And granted, Madhouse did a better job transitioning than some studios did, but it is an issue that can happen. So just something to keep in mind.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Moving on from that, we get to this one I hadn't actually seen, the Genius Party Happy Machine.
This was one of those anthology projects.
Yeah.
We discussed something like this a while back. The idea was have a bunch of different directors doing different shorts.
Yeah, the one he was behind was Happy Machine.
In fact, we did kind of dip into this when we talked about the times that we talked about Watanabe, since he was also in that project with Baby Blue. And of course, that's with the original one, because then there was a follow up called Genius Party Beyond, which came out the year afterward, and it's it's definitely an interesting beast. Whenever it comes to these sort of short collections, it's almost a case of a greatest hits album, just without them being hits yet.
Yeah.
Not the best metaphor for me, but it's close enough.
Close enough for government work. The next thing he released, I think this is kind of what a lot of people seem to remember him for, and that's Kaiba. This is also where I kind of started to notice just some more specific things about how this guy tends to kind of animate his stuff. If you look at just still shots of some of his work up till now, I wouldn't blame someone for looking at it and just immediately thinking that this is like very low budget and cheap work. But once you actually see things in motion,
Hmm.
it's an entirely different beast with Yuasa's works. Because these characters, they're not the most detailed, and there's like kind of a lot of empty space in the backgrounds of Kaiba. But once
Yep.
that action starts rolling, everything is just so quick, just fluid.
We covered Kaiba as part of Parliament of Geeks not too long ago, and we had said that it is a very good series, but it's definitely not gonna be a noob friendly affair, because there's a very almost Dr. Seuss like vibe with the way everything is designed, the way several of the characters are designed. A lot of stuff isn't going to be making sense. The but it is an interesting take when it comes to science fiction, due to the fact that the big theme is the mixing of bodies and memories.
Effectively, memories are treated as transferable data. He has a lot of fun playing around with that idea. It's a lot of interesting twists.
Hmm.
Like, if we were talking about in detail, I think the show is paced a little badly at times, but like, I'd recommend anyone at all interested in the idea of transferable memories, just give it a watch.
And truth be told, I want to see if I can bully somebody like Chuck Sonnenberg or the like, or somebody who has a very strong background in science fiction to look at it. And if it sounds like I want to play mind games with them, yes.
But yeah, like, it's after
Yes.
I watched Kaiba 2 is when I started looking into a bit more of like things Yuasa himself has said, and I came across that Kick Hard AMA. I'm kind of gonna put him in the same group of people that I did with like Satoshi Kon and Miyazaki, to where it comes across their animators at
Pretty much. And yeah, Kick is an interesting beast, but that wouldn't be for a few years, because
yeah.
after that is the story that was the first case of him being off his cocaine high with the Tatami Galaxy, which part of the reason that so much of his storytelling can be so cracktastic is he's both directing and writing. Tatami Galaxy was not the case. That was based on a not that was based on a novel by Tomihiko Morimi, and then adapted into an anime by him. Which means that the way to get him off his cocaine high is to put him on a leash. Although I will note this. I don't know if Tatami Galaxy has ever been dubbed, and the idea of watching it dubbed doesn't sit with me.
I don't believe so.
And truth be told, I think there's some things that just aren't going to work translated.
Like, even
But
if you're someone who's used to watching anime subtitled, that one might throw you off a bit because of how fast that main character's speaking. It
and
takes a moment to adjust to.
I remember Zan saying that that's something that was in the original story of him just talking, having these long diatribes in his internal monologue.
Okay, apparently the novel did get published in English, but not the anime.
What are you talking about? The anime's been available in English for a while. or not in dub,
Well, that's
admittedly,
what I
but
meant. Yeah. Was it an
um
official English release, or is it just the fan translations?
fan translation originally, and but it was licensed by Funimation years ago.
Ah,
The other thing to note is that is of course the fact that he's still playing around with storytelling. But I will always advise people, do not binge Tatami Galaxy, because a lot of it's very clear that the way that it was presented was meant to be watched one episode a week like it's on television.
yeah. Because if you watch multiple episodes of that one in a row, you start to realize, like, oh, each episode is basically a different route this guy could have taken in life at this school he joined.
For the first few episodes, yes. As a result of that, it uses a lot of the same characters, which I'm personally fine with.
Yeah.
I would rather have more characters that get. I would rather have more individual and more detailed stories with a smaller cast than a large cast with not as much detail.
I can agree with that.
Hmm.
There, though, we go on to Welcome to the Space Show, which I think he was only an animator on, actually. You'll see that a lot. Like, he still is doing a lot of animation work in between his own personal projects.
Then eventually, then eventually he decides to just set up his own studio, Science Saru. Although he was only doing that from 2013 to 2020. He stepped down because he had been going full bore with directing for 7 years straight. So he wanted to give himself a break, and he just went back to going freelance.
It's another thing I actually got from reading through his AMA. I think he actually prefers being an animator to a director. Not that he's
Probably
against jumping into the director seat, obviously.
probably because as a director you've got to wear so many
Yeah.
hats.
He basically just laughs at, yeah, it's easier just being the animator.
Then of course there was the whole thing with Kickheart, which I know because of certain high-profile failures, some people turn up their nose at crowdfunding when it comes to film or video games. But there have been some very successful kickstarted films. It's largely in the same spirit as indie films 10 or so years ago, and just the hallmarks of what some people are willing to do, want to get a film made, which is nothing new. I mean, did you ever see how much the original El Mariachi cost? Because that was on the shoest of shoestring budgets. Production for it, 7,225
Oh, wow.
in 1992, and a lot of the money was just from experiments that Rodriguez did. Of course, you had Clerks having a budget not too far off, and I don't know how much. Supposedly, the estimated budget for Kickheart was 201,000, which does make sense. Animation is going to add up on cost. I believe Kickard was the first big time that he had worked with Production IG instead of Madhouse.
I do want to say you're right on that. I don't want to make any promises. So don't take my word on it, but I do believe you're correct. I think at the very least it's the first thing where like he was heading a project for them. He might have done something with them in like an animating fashion just because he's been all over the place doing that. Like if we look through his animation only credits, we'll see him pop up working with Studio Ghibli. He's worked with Watanabe.
Apparently, Kickard was the first crowdfunded anime, supposedly. And as far as using Kickstarter with a Japanese animation studio, I could see that.
I will say I'm happy it hit that budget and actually got made because, as we've kind of mentioned, he didn't really have that big of a name stateside just because most of his stuff never came over. So it's nice to see he still managed to have enough people who knew that name and got the support to get this kicked off. He's built a pretty steady following over the years, it seems.
Hmm. And of course, a year later, he would do one episode of Space Dandy, which is if Space Dandy didn't have so many episodes, I would put that on the list. It's just we want to talk about drug trips. Like 2/3 of the episodes of Space Dandy are some kind of trip. Some more than others.
I could see why Watanabe would have wanted to get Yuasa in on Space Dandy.
Specifically, he worked on episode 16. I was gonna say he just directed. No, he wore all of the hats. He directed and boarded that episode. He wrote the episode. He directed the animation.
And I'm entirely sure Watanabe was okay with all of that.
I'm pretty sure he just gave him a few bullet points and then said, "Have at it."
Yeah, that's a pairing I wouldn't have guessed I would have saw if I had not seen Space Dandy specifically already. Because that seems a little out of what you would normally see from Watanabe at that point, but...
I do know that also he had worked on Ping Pong the animation in 2014, though I haven't seen that, so that one I can't really comment on.
Yeah.
But just the idea of doing an anime around ping pong, I would say it's ridiculous, but then I remember Balls of Fury exists.
I love that movie. I don't care how stupid it was.
In 2017, there was The Night is Short, Walk On Girl, which, for all intents and purposes, is a successor to Tatami Galaxy. It's based on a novel of the same name written by Morimi. So it's not exactly a sequel, but it is spiritually so, especially since both of them are centered around Kyoto University. Of course, there is Lou Over the Wall in 2017 as well. I'd say if there was anything that really broke him out into a wider audience, it was Devilman Crybaby.
Now, I skipped this one just because back when it came out, because I've never really cared for Devilman just in general.
Which I can understand, though I will always have a healthy amount of respect for Go Nagai because he was one of the early purveyors of really pushing the envelope when it came to animation. Even more so in the 70s, where animation was kind of on a downswing. Mostly because stuff like Tokusatsu was really eating anime's lunch around that time. And if I'm gonna be honest, there was a lot of animation in the 70s that was really ugly looking. I'm not saying that ugly looking from a modern lens. I mean ugly looking even for its time. I know some people will romanticize about certain classics, but you have to keep in mind the whole 90% of everything is crap is a two-way street.
Yeah, this is a show I know a lot of people were talking about when it was coming out, because it kind of got like all those old school guys from back, and they're like, oh hey, we're getting Devilman back. And then, of course, you had all of the people who are just fans of Yuasa in general who are watching his stuff. And kind of being the first major release on a kind of Western platform, it was kind of all there to get his name out to more people. That said, as I mentioned, I didn't see this one. It's got some good-looking screenshots I've seen. I can't really comment on the quality of it.
I can. It is a lot of it is a more or less retelling of the original manga, just with his particular flair. It is not a happy ending. Then again, it's Nagai. I don't think Nagai has ever done a happy ending. There's been it does reinterpret some of the anti-war aspect that was in Devilman early on. Apparently, fans of Nagai are a bit divided on it. Personally, I enjoyed it, but I can see why some people probably did not. It was part of that first wave of Netflix trying to court anime studios to doing exclusive stuff.
From my understanding, it was pretty well received for the most part.
As far as that early wave of Netflix anime, it definitely was the best.
I don't remember too many shows. I remember there was that. I don't remember when Evergarden came out.
I don't think Evergarden came out the same year.
Yeah. I think it was a bit after, like 2019, 2020.
Also, I should note, Devilman Crybaby was animated by his studio Science Saru. Working on an IP like Devilman was going to get a lot of eyes on him.
Yeah. Which I will say it's kind of a shame because it looks like some of the follow-up stuff he did after that also, never made it stateside.
I'm not sure what you
like Ride the Wave.
Lou Over the Wall was released by G Kids. Ride Your Wave. It apparently should. It was. Well, I'm not entirely sure if that's even the case about that, because it was at international film festivals, so there had to be something to that effect, and it was distributed by Toho.
Oh, it did eventually get a release from G Kids, it looks like, a few years later.
G Kids seems to have cemented themselves as the criterion
Yeah.
for anime. And of course, in 2019 and 2020, there was Super Shiro, which feels like him dialing himself into the mindset he had with his Shin-chan days.
Yeah.
But he was co-director for that. The other half was Tomohisa Shimoyama, which definitely makes sense, because around that same span of time, we have Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken. And you know how you had said that you find Yuasa to be an animator at heart? Eizouken is definitely a case in point with that, because it is an anime all about animation.
I definitely see why Masaaki would have wanted to direct something like that.
Now, granted, it wasn't his writing; it was him adapting a manga. Which, that whole animator at heart, maybe that's the reason why he seems to be comfortable adapting various manga. I do remember early 2020 it making a lot of waves. Of course, then there was Japan Sinks, which was based on a disaster novel of the same name. I have not seen that. And the year after, in 2021, there was Inuo, which I do remember a lot of people talking about, and I'm especially on on certain sites. I haven't seen it yet, but it looks the cleanest of Yuasa's material. And shortly after that, he bowed out from Science Saru and went back to going freelance. It's stated that the reason he did it was he needed to cool off, which I can understand, because he had founded that company in 2013. So from 2013 to 2021, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 projects over the course of 7 years.
That's kind of crazy.
And three and three of the three of those projects, or more like three and a half, were all in 2020. Super Shiro was dipped into it a bit. It was technically 2019 through 2020. Um, Eizouken and Japan Sinks, both its original version and its theatrical cut, were in 2020, and Inuo was in 2021. It's pushing it when a director is working on more than one project in a year. Like, just working on two projects in a year is pushing luck in some cases. So I can see why he wanted to dial back.
Yeah. Now, as far as I know, the only things he's done since then were, I know he's done the Spy Family season 2 opening. He directed
Hmm.
that bit. And apparently some album art for somebody.
Though there one particular thing that I do f- I do find interesting is his attitudes on the animation industry. Specifically, he thinks that the there should be a shift to some of the work cultures that are seen in the States or in Europe. Namely, that grind culture should be moved away from. And that was that was part of a founding principle with Science Saru.
I could see why someone would want to move away from that, because I know there's a lot of stories about stuff just burning people out. I know the writer for the Bleach manga got burnt out really bad come the end of Bleach because of that schedule.
Which is why after that he announced his retirement. Now, granted, that retirement didn't last long because a few years later he would do Burn the Witch, and then get the vibe back in him to do do more with Bleach. Because let's be honest, when you're in that kind of position, you never truly retire. You take long vacations.
Yeah.
Even if you say, "Oh, I'm done. I'm retired," the itch is going to come back, which is why I've joked that Miyazaki will never retire. He will stop directing things when he's dead. Because he was supposed to be retired, then Boy and the Heron comes out, and we're back to square one. But Yuasa has also been very vocal about preserving traditional animation, which is because he doesn't want that to be supplanted with computer animation, which I can certainly understand. The thing with his works is that there are certain recurring themes that that he does, and it is funny that I bring up that I brought up Miyazaki early because apparently his one of the big influences that made him want to work in animation was the Castle of Cagliostro. But you look at the influences and I get the feeling that if someone asked Yuasa what his big influences were, he'd have a long list of names. Just because he seems like somebody who is easily inspired.
Oh yeah. Especially in the case of the Castle of Cagliostro. This came up briefly when we talked Miyazaki, but I remember when I saw the whole big release in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who was behind Pixar saw Castle of Cagliostro, and that inspired him to basically start Pixar because Cagliostro was doing stuff he couldn't even imagine how they did, and he knew how they handled like all the Disney animations at the time. Cagliostro had a weirdly bigger imprint than a lot of people realize, with how many people got inspired by it.
Mm-hmm. Which is funny in hindsight because we had said that it's the least Miyazaki film,
It's
but
one of
that's
my
only in
favorites he
hindsight.
does, but yeah.
It's it's weird to contrast it with the rest of Lupin. I guess I'll put it that way. But
Yeah.
the other thing that is interesting, especially when you look at Yuasa's inspirations, is something we've talked about multiple times throughout this series, as well as I've talked about on my own shows, and that is among anime fans and among certain segments of geek culture in general. There seems to be this idea that there's this um, wall of segregation between the East and the West. When you look at a lot of prolific directors, that's not really the case when it comes to their influences. When it comes to the list of favorite animations that Yuasa has, it's all over the place. He even cites
The
Tex
Simpsons.
Avery.
He cites The Simpsons and Pinocchio too.
Yeah,
And Thief
he
and the
cites.
Cobbler, which makes a lot of sense.
Although I have to wonder which version because Thief and the Cobbler is a
Yeah.
is a story in and of itself
He
about how that's
specified the
used.
Richard Williams version.
See that I can see, but you know, citing that Yellow Submarine, the King and the Mockingbird, Unico and the Island of Magic, Wicked City, Galaxy Express, Future Boy Conan, Tom and Jerry, even Anne of Green Gables. Also Salvador Dali, which the Salvador Dali influence is something I should have seen sooner.
Yeah. I will say, I'm still waiting for him to follow up on this, but he responded on that AMA to someone asking him about him doing a giant robot anime. He says, I grew up with Mazinger Z, so I am sure I will eventually work on a show with giant robots. I'm still waiting for that. I'd like to see a Yuasa take on the mechs.
Not just Mazinger Z, but also Golden Warrior Gold Lighton. Maybe he'll end up doing that one of these days. The last thing that was done was Inuo, which got a worldwide release last year. Well, soon to be 2 years ago, given the time that we're doing this.
Yeah. But like at the end of the day, like I don't think I'm gonna be like a huge fan of his work like I was someone like Satoshi Kon, but I'm not gonna say this guy isn't interesting. He's very much worth checking out. And I like
Hmm.
anyone who has a style just completely different from anyone else out there.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I said earlier, you're not going to confuse him with anybody else.
Now just imagine if all of this really is the sober plan. What happens if he does start doing drugs?
Well, if he does, then he'd probably end up he'd probably end up with with something that isn't going to be shown at at a film festival.
Or maybe it's gonna have the opposite effect and we're just gonna have like a typical shonen anime out of him. You know those people on the road you see, you have to ask yourself either they are on drugs or they need to be on drugs. One of the two. But I am looking forward to an inevitable comeback of Yuasa.
Yeah,
I hope he
and
enjoys this long vacation.
I do want to clarify the that he didn't fully step away from Science Saru. He just stepped down from being CEO. And everything was amiable. The idea is he's still open to working on projects there. It's just being and working on projects and being an executive at the same
Yeah.
time was a bit much.
He definitely strikes me as a guy who'd be a lot happier just like doing the same thing that Kon and Watanabe did and just kind of taking on a smaller number of projects than a lot of his peers. That's it. I
Which
look forward to whatever he's going to do once he does come back.
also I should note the reason part of the reason why the name Science Saru was chosen is because in a lot of his self portraits he portrays himself as a monkey. Not the first person in anime I know of to do that. I think the guy behind Gintama also does that. This is just a thing that we seem to see with with creators in anime, where they'll portray themselves as an animal instead of doing some sort of self-portrait. Like I know that the woman behind Full Metal Alchemist would do something similar, but as a cow. Don't ask me why. Supposedly she grew up on a farm, which is the reason why um Edward having a hatred of milk is something of an in joke. Yeah, if I grew up on if I knew how the milk was made, maybe I'd be a little. You know what? I'm not gonna say that that's the case because I'd still drink it.
I mean, I still ate hot dogs. I knew that crap was made.
Yeah, I know there's the whole expression about seeing how the sausage is made, but if I'm hungry, I'm eating. But I think that about covers everything that we could potentially cover when it comes to the guy.
Yeah, because again, most of the guy's work wasn't really as a director heading projects. It's been as an animator.
Hmm.
Even while he was doing these bigger projects, he was still doing his work as an animator in between them. Yeah, unless you have any final thoughts on it, I think we pretty much covered that.
I'd say we got everything that we're gonna get.
Yeah, so we'll see you back here next month for whatever we decide our next topic would be. Next week, you'll also be able to see me and Mildra continue to talk about. Wow, I completely forgot the name of that game. It's a science fiction one we're covering.
Hmm.
But yeah, you can see him on our or see us on his channel talking about that on Valley of the Judged. Sufficiently advanced. That was it.
Yes. Hmm. Yeah, we'll be diving further into that, and I do recommend people at the very least give it a look because it's free. You have no excuse. Like even if sufficiently advanced is absolute shit, I'd still tell people to take a look at it because it costs you nothing.
Yeah, it is a diceless game, which has been interesting for me. We'll
Hmm.
see how it goes. And on the 12th of next month will be a first for me. I'm going to be having Austin, one of the creators of Mythweaver AI, on to talk about that project. It's an kind of AI assistant tool for DMs and whatnot. They refer to it as an ethical AI, which when we talk to him, or when I talk to him, we'll get into what exactly that means. And with all that, I guess we will see you guys here next month.
Stay frosty.